Well, it's pretty much that time of the year again. On December 15th, we're getting yet another fucking Star Wars movie. This is really the one that sets it in for me that this will never end. My favorite film franchise is well on its way to getting played out, but at this point, we have 7 main series movies, 3 TV movies, and an anthology film. I feel like reviewing the original 6 Star Wars movies is pointless, because what can be said that hasn't already been said previously? So rather than doing that, I'll be talking about all these movies through ranking them. Before I start this list, I want to point out that we're only looking at live action films, so the Clone Wars movie won't be on this list. The Star Wars Holiday Special came out in 1978, and it's one of the earliest pieces of Star Wars media. And as you've probably heard by now, this movie is really bad. I've seen this movie 4 times. The first time was out of morbid curiosity. This was like in 2009 before YouTube had any comprehensive reviews, and I thought, how bad could it really be? Then the other times was because I had friends who wanted to see it, and I was like, I guess I'll watch it again. Trust me when I say you don't want to see this piece of shit. First off, the majority of the characters don't speak language, just moans and screams. And of course there are no subtitles. Half of this movie you won't understand what's going on. And of course you have the infamous Granddad Wookiee watching porn, the musical numbers, and of course the whip and stir scene. The main cast actually shows up, not for long, but they show up at least. You also have to respect Mark Hamill for showing up even with his face completely fucked up. Anyway, fuck this movie. For a more in-depth review of this movie, watch our drunk view on it, but anyway, this movie takes place after the first Ewoks film and stars a young girl and Wicket. Mace, the protagonist from the first movie, is killed along with the rest of his family by space pirates. However, his sister Sindel survived, and her and Wicket are forced to fight space pirates to save the Ewoks. On the way, they meet an old fat man who takes them in and helps them on their quest. They fight witches, the space pirates, and even break into some kind of medieval castle. The weird thing about this film is it felt like a live-action Smurfs movie. It was a fantasy action movie made for little girls. It makes no sense why this was Star Wars. And the movie was virtually unwatchable, not only starring an Ewok who mostly speaks and squeaks and squeals, but also a little girl, and we all know how good child actors tend to be, especially in Star Wars. Also, it had to be a TV movie budget. Take some of my humble advice and never watch this bullshit. Now for our first feature film, the high-budget super films we'll be seeing yearly until the day we die. Anyway, Attack of the Clones. This movie is very flawed and very bad. Although the action is okay, the film suffers from being horribly boring. It also really does little to push the story of the franchise aside from starting the Clone Wars and having Anakin kill some sand people. This causes the film to be skippable and feels like it only got included to have a second film in the trilogy. Literally watch episode 1 and then episode 3. Other than Anakin getting married in the last 5 minutes and the Clone Wars starting, it adds nothing. The dialogue is some of the cringiest dialogue in the series. Of course you have the classic sand line and everything with Dexter Jettster. This film also felt like a movie that showed what this franchise would be for the rest of eternity as a soulless cash cow that could give a shit about making a movie that made sense or was good. I mean, the Jedi War was cool, but George traded emotion, character chemistry, and good story for lightsabers, rehashed characters, and stupid connections that didn't need to be made. Phantom Menace had a similar problem, but watching that film at least felt like it put something into it. I mean, it had practical effects, characters with more motivation, and so on. It felt like a film that tried to explore Star Wars, pre-Empire, but was misguided. But in this film, George Lucas just said, fuck it, everybody's a Jedi, everything's CGI, and let's toss stupid shit no one asked for. This movie sucks. Also, Count Dooku was boring. What a waste of Christopher Lee. I will admit these TV movies had no chance of being any higher on this list, I'm just being real. But in the defense of this movie, it's far better than the other Ewoks film, and it does a hell of a lot better job earning the Star Wars name. Yeah, this movie still suffers from child actors, but Mace is at least old enough to be interesting and actually participate in the action. There also wasn't any old pedophiles in this one, which is a plus. The story is boring, but it does spice it up with some cool action and better motivation for our heroes as they're trying to save their parents. Plus, for a TV movie, the stop motion isn't half bad. We also have hang-gliding Ewoks, which is exciting. Ironically, even though this movie is made for an older audience than the other movie, it's less depressing and ends with a somewhat happy ending, rather than having our main character being orphaned and scooped up by some old pedophile to live on his spaceship. Honestly, if you can sit through a TV movie, I'd suggest this film, but keep in mind it does get boring and it is a TV film. When I heard about this movie, I was unsure what to think. On one hand, the story was about the Death Star plans being stolen, and it seems like a pointless story to tell. Spoiler alert, it blows up. On the other hand, it is the first film since 1983 that takes place during the original trilogy era. Maybe we would see something new, maybe something interesting, ideas that hadn't been seen previously in this time period. We didn't. This movie fucking sucked. Aside from Ewoks, The Battle of Endor, no other movie on this list deserves to exist less than this one. This movie was pointless. First off, everything was a rehash. AT-ATs, sand planets, X-Wings. Yeah, we saw some new trooper classes, but that doesn't change the fact that nothing else was presented. I mean, even the characters can be easily compared to other characters in the franchise. Jyn Erso was just depressing Rey with less character. Also, for a company trying to push diversity so hard, Disney did a pretty good job picking another 100-pound white brunette girl that is approximately 5'6". Then we have Cassian, aka Mexican Han Solo, Krennic, who's pretty much Grand Moff Tarkin, K2SO is a hybrid of Jar Jar Binks and C-3PO. Really though, K2SO is terrible, and fans turn a blind eye to him while they shit on Jar Jar. Not trying to defend Jar Jar, but damn. The rest of the characters are just basically cannon fodder used to warm pegs at Toys R Us. I mean, sell really well and not sit on the clearance rack at Kmart until they end up in the dumpster because they couldn't sell. By the way, Booty should have been the main character. I go more into that in my Rogue One rant video though, so check that out. Anyway, the cameos are cringy, but perhaps this movie's biggest crime was the CGI reconstructions of Grand Moff Tarkin and Leia. Give it 10 years, Disney. Your technology isn't quite there. I can tell that that horse isn't Carrie Fisher. Ultimately, this movie's supposed to be the first 2 hours of the original Star Wars, and it's blasphemy. Another one of George's now infamous prequel films, the edge factor is strong in this one, with decapitations, people burning alive, spousal abuse, and of course a horrible massacre of helpless children. George earned his PG-13 rating on this one. The biggest thing this movie had going for it was being the bridge between Anakin and Vader. For that reason, it's the most necessary of the prequel films, but it's still not the best. For the most part, it is just a lot of boring shit followed by several over-the-top, infinitely expensive action scenes. It's kinda cool to watch the fights and shit, sure, but the film has a real 0 to 100 feel and forgets to even try to get us to like any of the characters or show them as real human beings, aside from when Anakin and Obi-Wan are talking on Grievous's ship at the start of the movie. Honestly, this movie's like a laser light show. It is cool to watch the cool lightsaber fights, but it's really lacking on having any meaningful scenes, which is a problem. This movie should have done a better job explaining Anakin's motivations and added more scenes of him maybe being torn and seduced better. Palpatine is just like, hey, you want to join the dark side? And he's like, sure, then he's killing children a couple scenes later. But at the start of the movie, Anakin's a noble Jedi. Plus, now with the Clone Wars series and shit, we've seen so much content showing him to be a super noble Jedi, so it just seems too rushed. The Phantom Menace is the best of the prequels. That may be a controversial point, but hear me out. Yes, Jar Jar is cringy, and so is Kid Anakin, but the movie almost tried to have a plot and character development, sort of. And other than Anakin making C-3PO, it didn't overly push the remember this old thing bullshit. The plot follows the resurgence of the Sith and the introduction of Anakin Skywalker. I liked seeing Obi-Wan being more brash, and by the end he grows up a bit and starts to seem more like the Jedi he grows into in the original Star Wars trilogy. It lays the roots for the trilogy that would establish the Sith, the Clone Wars, and the relationship between Anakin and Obi-Wan, and ultimately Anakin's tragic turn to the dark side. Sadly, the second movie threw all that out the window, just made it into an action porn movie, and by extension, making this movie kinda suck, because all it tried to establish was blatantly ignored in its follow-ups. That said, there are missteps, like not establishing Qui-Gon or Darth Maul well, then just killing them, and the whole Anakin made C-3PO thing, and the whole pod racing thing, and the whole bad acting thing, and the whole edited like shit thing, and the whole Jar Jar thing shine over the story that it tried to set up for the prequel trilogy. I really liked The Force Awakens and debated what spot this film should be in for a while, but ultimately picked on spot 4 because it felt like a soft remake of the original Star Wars. Yeah, I like the new characters, Finn, Rey, and Poe are great new leads, and it was fun seeing Leia and Han back in the franchise, and that Luke cameo at the end was super cool. This film also was shot great, JJ did a great job, the story was fun, engaging, and had likable, well-established characters. Kylo Ren was also a badass villain and felt like a cool shadow to Darth Vader and his lingering effect over the galaxy to this day. It was also cool that our main characters had their issues after the OG trilogy. Luke started a new Jedi Order that didn't go too well. Leia and Han had a kid and he became Darth Vader Part 2. It was cool. I also liked that they did add some new stuff to the mythos, like the Knights of Ren, and all the new character redesigns are cool as well. I liked how the technological advances are believable for a 30-year span, except for the Star Killer base. Like, how the fuck did they make a planet-sized Death Star in 30 years? The Great Pyramids took 20 years to build, but they were able to rush together a planet 30 years after the old government fell out of power? Color me impressed. This film ultimately did a good job establishing the new trilogy, and even though it was kind of just a remake of the original Star Wars, I do give them props for setting up a seemingly strong trilogy to come. I'm praying The Last Jedi and Episode 9 are good. I've already sacrificed too much for this movie. I like Return of the Jedi a lot. Don't get me wrong, it is the worst of the original trilogy, and yes, it brought the Ewoks into the Star Wars mythos, which did cause the existence of this garbage. But other than that, it was a strong way to end the best trilogy of all time. Good beat evil, Han was saved, and it all ends with a happy celebration. This movie definitely had its problems like wasting Boba Fett and the aforementioned Ewoks. I also don't think the pacing is nearly as good as the first two Star Wars films, but it's cool seeing Luke finally become the Jedi he trained to be, and the reveal that Luke and Leia are brother and sister came out of left field. And yes, it is slightly incestual that Luke had such a hard-on for his sister in the first movie, but that's neither here nor there. Yeah, I know most people think this movie is the best Star Wars film, and I think it's definitely close. This movie has it all. Great pacing, great story, great character relationships. This is the perfect middle film for a trilogy. Luke starts learning to be a Jedi, Han and Leia's relationship starts to develop, and we meet some new friends and enemies, such as Lando and Boba Fett. And of course, that twist that Darth Vader is Luke's father is still one of the most iconic twists in all of cinema. And though this movie gets pretty dark, it ends optimistic and leaves the audience wanting to dive headfirst into the next adventure with our heroes by the end of this film. I also want to point out that this is the movie that gave people the dark movies are smart and better than regular movies, which, I mean, obviously isn't true. If you have a great dark story with characters who you root for, it's great because you want to see them resolve this problem and see how they can make a brighter future. Take that into account, DC and Warner Bros. Star Wars is the best Star Wars movie. It creates the most memorable cast of characters in any movie ever. Luke, Han, Leia, and Obi-Wan. Not to mention characters who don't talk are great too. R2-D2, C-3PO, and Chewbacca don't speak English at all but have great characters in their own right. Do I even need to mention Darth Vader, who has to be one of the best villains of all time? Not to mention the universe it created with all sorts of creatures, the ships, the Death Star, and of course it establishes the story of two governments fighting for power, one side for oppression, one side for freedom. It is a classic film with a classic story, and the impact of this film is felt in almost every film to this day, be it in the effects, story, or world building in general. This film has to be the most parodied film of all time, and I can't forget the music, which had set the tone not only for this film but all the subsequent Star Wars films. Star Wars is a classic and will never be surpassed by another film in this series, in my opinion.
You think you have what it takes?
Tonight, finally feeling free and it feels so right. Oh, time to do the things I like. Gonna see a princess, everything's alright. Oh, no job but an answer to. Ain't a fixture in the palace zoo. No, and since the carbonite's off me, I'm living life now that I'm free. Yeah, told me get myself together. Now I got myself together. Now I made it through the weather. Better days are gonna get better. I'm so happy.